Comrades, just on cue, we've had the rain. And this is very mild compared to the kind of situation that we faced in previous years, because I can remember speaking here to an audience roughly this size, and my voice could not carry beyond the third row because of the beating in hurricane proportions on the roof of the meeting. Now, weather and this camp has played a very important role in the development of the Socialist Party and the committee of the CWI, because I can remember coming here in 2007 from a holiday in Italy when I went up Mount Vesuvius with Peter Taaffe. And I drew an analogy there between this dormant volcano and what was likely to happen in the world economy. And it was actually borne out very dramatically and very quickly. But if I could use another weather analogy tonight, I've been on a holiday this less dramatic in the Lake District, when, to say the least, the weather was very mixed. It was sunshine and showers, and largely the latter as far as the holiday was concerned. And this bears a comparison with what is happening in the world economy at the present time, which of course, as with the slump of 2007, 2008, will have a direct bearing on the way events will develop in the course of the next period itself. And in the course of what has happened in the last week, you can see the outlines of a possible future slump in the developments that have been taking place in China, where the stock exchange there, that's not a normal stock exchange. It's propped up by the state, and China is a hybrid, where there's still a large state sector and there is a developing capitalist sector which is developing and having an effect on the living standards and the conditions of the Chinese working people itself. And as a result of this peculiar combination, China has actually grown since the 2007-2008 crisis at an enormous speed, and has increased production in that time by 78%. The US, which is the strongest economy in the world, has not developed more than 8% in the course of that period. And the reason for that is the remnants of the planned economy, if you like. You couldn't describe it as a planned economy, but the remnants of the planned economy that have given weapons to the government of China, which is not on hand for other capitalist powers throughout the world. Of course, it's a one-party regime, and we're opposed to that. We stand for workers' democracy and so on. But nevertheless, the developments of China have been spectacular in their effects on the world. It already before this crisis was slowing down, and that has been felt throughout the world. In the so-called emerging markets of Brazil, for instance, have gone now to a real drop in production. All of those economies that depended upon the exports, if you like, of commodities to China, all those economies were directly affected before this development in the last couple of days. And that's why in Latin America, in Asia, in Africa, combined with the collapse in the price of oil and the oil producers, has had a catastrophic effect. For instance, in Brazil, the recently elected President Dilma, relatively recently, she now stands at something like 7.5% in the polls, and there's a movement to try and indict her. The loss on the stock exchange in China in the last week or so, according to the Financial Times this morning, totaled $4.5 trillion, which is the equivalent of the overall economy of Germany itself. Now, I don't believe that these events, because they've cut interest rates, will lead to an immediate drop in China, because they've intervened and have repercussions like 2007, 2008. But the tremors, if you like, of an earthquake, which will develop at a later stage and will have an effect on all countries and all continents throughout the globe. We live in a period of sharp and abrupt changes in the situation. As John indicated, it's summed up by the drama of Greece and recent events that have taken place in Europe. And one thing that strikes you about these events, and it's applicable to Britain as well in the development of the Corbyn phenomena, is the enormous speeded up rate of development of events. Tasks which appear to be, if you like, on the agenda for a year, are looming in months. Tasks which were for a month are looming in weeks, and so on. That is the position that we face today. We have to have a leap of the imagination to remember in early July we had the historic and magnificent landslide in the referendum in Greece. How marvellously did the immortal Greek masses, particularly the working class and the youth, respond in the course of that referendum and actually scored 62% in opposition to the policies of austerity that was being put forward by the EU itself. What reserves of revolutionary energy was shown in that particular event? Where after all, you have to remember that there's already been 30 general strikes in Greece, and yet once again the Greek masses have risen to their feet and have shaken Europe and have shaken the austerity programme itself. It not only shook the ruling classes of Europe, shook the Greek ruling classes, it also unfortunately shook Tsipras himself, who was the Prime Minister of the Syriza government itself, that the masses were expecting so much from when it was elected. Remember this year, earlier this year, a period of about 8 months ago, it came to power. And our comrades went to bed on the night of the referendum where there was a yes vote, and they woke up with a no vote the next day when the government went cap in hand to the European Union and accepted a vicious programme of austerity that shocked the Greek workers themselves. Even Varoufakis, actually, and we criticised him. I wrote an article in Socialism Today really saying that his main problem was it was wishful thinking. He expected, but he could convince the werewolves of Brussels, if you like, on the reasonableness of his programme. He would go there and they would see the logic of his case. We pointed out that we're in an entirely different period today when social democracy cannot carry through reforms. In fact, the betrayal is inherent in the ideas of reformism. We support reforms, but we link it to the idea of changing society, and that has been the theme of our comrades in Greece in the course of this period itself. He was given the power by the Greek workers to transform the situation in Greece, to stand up to the EU, and to light a fire that we believe would have spread throughout the whole of Europe itself. But he did not know what to do with this power. Trotsky in the 1930s, when he was commenting on social democratic governments then, said that in effect, in a situation like we have today, where there's no real room for lasting reforms within the confines of capitalism, really the leaders of the mass organisations, unless they're prepared to mobilise the working class, are afraid of power and therefore will retreat in the face of the movement that will take place. It was like, frankly, winning the World Cup in the referendum. Your team, let's say Stevenage, and that's a leap of the imagination, won the World Cup. Not only their league, they won the World Cup. And then they went on, and in this marvellous situation, and then the next day you're relegated to the 54th division. That's what it was like to be a Greek worker. Such was the situation in Greece at that particular time. If you take the programme that is being suggested, it means the equivalent for Britain of 8 million unemployed. That's the reality of the position in Greece at the moment. The agonies of the Greek working class will be added to now by this rotten deal. For instance, the attack on pensions, a reduction of almost a third. And unbelievably, millions of workers in Greece are reliant on the pensions of the older generation to put a little bit of bread on the table of working class families themselves. I haven't got time to go into it. The character of this agreement means the occupation of Greece by the EU authorities. It's equivalent in the minds of the Greek masses. And I've seen it. I went there in 1974 rather, when the PASOK was created, when the junta was overthrown, and the Greek masses have a long memory of what happened in the occupation of Greece during the Second World War, which provoked a revolutionary movement. And that has been continued as a theme, if you like, in Greece in the course of that situation itself. And let nobody say there was no alternative, that Cyprus had no alternative in this situation. Yes, Greece accounts for 2% of the Eurozone. It's a small economic force even throughout Europe. But the political capital of the Greek working class is immense. This is borne out, by the way, paradoxically, by the very viciousness of the European Commission of the Troika in forcing Greece to capitulate in the most humiliating fashion. In effect, Cyprus was waterboarded in the course of the negotiations that took place. And why? Because of the fear of contagion, the fear of Greece spreading to Spain, to Portugal, to Italy, to all the countries, and including that in Britain as well, all the countries that are suffering from austerity at the moment. What is that, by the way? If not a vindication of Trotsky's marvellous idea of the permanent revolution which he developed in Russia, except applied to the advanced industrial countries, because Trotsky's argument was, if you begin in Russia, which wasn't ready for socialism by itself, but the weak link of capitalism could break in Russia, and that would spark off an international revolution. If the revolution succeeded in Germany, it would come to the assistance of the Russian workers. And the revolution did break out, but it was betrayed by the German Social Democrats. And what was involved here is the fear that this movement would spread throughout the whole of Europe. Our comrades in the organisation of Syriza have developed tremendously in this situation with the speed of events that I mentioned before. They've raised the question of the nationalisation of the banks and workers' control and workers' management, of a state monopoly of foreign trade to prevent the blackmail of the big banks and the investors in Greece taking their money out of the country. And then, of course, this leading to a movement in the rest of Europe itself. One consequence of these events where Cyprus stepped back, he bent the knee, he actually acted like the German social democratic leaders in 1914, on August the 4th, 1914, in one of the most perfidious incidents in working class history, when the German social democrats and their British cousins, their French and so on, bent the knee to international capitalism, refused to fight the First World War, and the consequence was the terrible suffering. This was an August the 4th moment, not just in Greece, but for all of those who stand within the confines of capitalism and base themselves upon a social democratic programme. And what has been the consequence of this? And this has lessons for us in the developments that are taking place in Britain at the present time, in the very early phase, if you like. It resulted in a split in Syriza on the Central Committee, a big split. It resulted in 1/3 of the MPs of Syriza in the Parliament breaking away, in the left platform, in the process of developing a new party called Popular Unity. It deliberately invokes the example of Chile, of Allende in Chile, in the sense of that represented a revolutionary movement in Latin America at that time. Cyprus now is going to elections. They'll be held in the next period. Probably he'll come out with about 28% of the vote. This new party could get anything from 5% to 8%, maybe more. We can't say. But nevertheless, it will get representation. And in the coalition around this, we've put forward the idea that all the constituent organisations in the formation of this party should be able to have at least one MP representing their point of view. This is a movement that can have repercussions in Spain. It's not an accident that we have a position in Spain now where PSOE, as the so-called traditional party of the working class, has experienced a meltdown, not yet on the scale of PASOK in Greece, but similar to the situation in Greece itself. The same, by the way, will develop in Northern Europe, over the next period itself. I haven't got time to deal with what is happening within the different parties of Europe in any great detail. But you see the crisis of social democracy. And what is social democracy? Social democracy's idea was that it was possible by piecemeal reforms to gradually transform the living standards of the working class, and we would progress towards a more equal, to a more rounded out society, if you like. The situation of world capitalism today, especially expressed sharply in Southern Europe, does not allow the possibility of lasting reforms. So the choice is between bending the knee or going with the working class, and that is posed in Britain as well, on the industrial and on the political plane, to arm the working class for a programme of not just fighting austerity, but fighting also against capitalism itself. This situation has produced the developments that we see in Podemos in relation to Syriza in Greece, but also of the phenomena of Jeremy Corbyn itself. It's been an incredible turnaround. I won't deal with this in a huge amount of detail. I give one or two points which are relevant to this discussion, because Dave Nellis will touch on this in a bit more detail in the course of the meeting tomorrow. But Jeremy Corbyn, let me assure you, this is an example of the role of the accident in history. He's an obscure figure on the left. The left itself was feeble. The comrades know what happened. He was able to stand in this election. He got through the nominating procedure by seconds, and only because they thought that he was harmless. And by himself, he is harmless, if you like. But what it reflected is the enormous accumulation that had been building up, not in the last couple of months or in the last couple of years, but over the previous period of years and years, where the masses, and particularly the new generation, were looking for an alternative. And history has a way where there can be an accidental figure who can provide that alternative. I mean, Charlie Chaplin in a film, there's one incident where he picks up a red flag, and then the masses come around the corner and he suddenly finds himself in the leadership of this demonstration. Well, it's not exactly like that. Jeremy Corbyn has a bit more nous and understanding than that. There are some people, by the way, who are now saying, who will be nameless for this discussion, who are now saying, well, the Socialist Party has changed its position. We haven't changed our position. We recognise that when there's a turn in the situation, we have to respond to that. The development around Corbyn represents a new phenomenon. It is a new party, if you like, in the process of formation. It's not an accident that most of the new radical elements have come outside of the Labour Party. The masses are practical people. They will seize hold of any figure, of any individual, in order to press home their advantage in terms of their policies. The Labour Party is dead in the form of Blairism. 4 million people moved away from the Labour Party. It took the experience of Blairism, of Mark I under Blair himself. It took Mark II under Brown. Mark II, unfortunately, under Ed Miliband, slightly radical phrases, but cut from the same cloth of Blairism itself. And this incredible support for Corbyn has not come out of thin air. It's the same phenomena with Podemos. It's the same phenomena with Syriza. The experience of the working class, particularly the advanced guiding layers, are looking for a new road and have seized hold of this situation, and therefore are prepared to press it to the end. And what's striking about the position is all of those authoritative figures from the past who seemingly could do no wrong, electoral wizards like Blair and Brown, don't have a slightest effect. It's like a drop of water on a hot stove. It's dissolved. It doesn't have any effect. You had, for instance, Frank Field, incredibly, quite honestly, saying in one of the articles in The Guardian, in the Evening Standard, Frank Field is an inveterate right-winger. To inspire the voters, Labour must ditch its faith in Blairism. So you think, well, this holds out hope for the Labour movement. Somebody on the right is moving towards the left, but he's moving towards the left in words in order to get a candidate that can stop what is a genuine movement at the bottom, moving against the past itself. We then had David Miliband. We've heard a lot, haven't we, about people being banned from voting. In the opening article that he had in The Guardian, he said, I've already cast my vote for New York. In other words, he's been outside of British politics for the last 3 years and he's cast his votes. One commentator said he has the verbal dexterity of Stanley Unwin. Now, Stanley Unwin's a bit unknown to the new generation, but I'll take time out after the meeting to explain what he was like. But the key question is what the Financial Times said in an editorial. It said, this is not just a problem for the Labour Party. This is not just an issue who becomes the leader of the Labour Party. This is an issue for society, which means them, means for the ruling class. Because they have managed to rule through the open representatives of capital, which is the Tory Party, and through their second 11, which was the Labour Party, particularly under open bourgeois leadership, capitalist leadership of Blair, of Brown, and unfortunately of Miliband himself. And they are really terrified because remember, we were expelled from the Labour Party, that is the militant, which represented the socialist wing of the Labour Party. That was inspired not by Blair, but that was inspired by Thatcher and Tebbit in the House of Commons goading the Labour leadership. Why? Remember that Thatcher herself said, when she was asked what her greatest achievement was, she said, Tony Blair. In other words, the transformation of the Labour Party from a workers' party at bottom to an open capitalist party itself. Now they see this achievement crumbling before their eyes. But what's concrete in this situation is how the issue develops and what demands we put forward. Because it is possible now, there's not much time to vote, that Jeremy Corbyn will be elected in the ballot that is likely to take place. But the central question that comrades should think about here, if Jeremy Corbyn got this kind of response, what would have been the case if the trade union leaders would have launched an open mass workers' party? You would have had this phenomena and more, with the weight and the power of the trade union movement itself. You've got now an enormous radicalisation taking place, where the right wing now are on the back foot. They're looking desperately to try and ban people left, right and centre. 3,000 have been banned. It's up to 25,000. It could be a lot more than that. One report put it at 50,000 people being banned. If you vote for the Greens in an election, they can prove it. If you vote for other parties on the left, you're automatically barred from voting. There was a report on social media yesterday that even one of the representatives of the Penarth woodcraft folk has been banned under the latest proposals because he was a danger. Think about this, by the way. They are banning people in this election who voted for the Greens or may have voted for other parties. How was the Labour Party created in the first instance? The Labour Party was created by former voters for the Liberal Party, to be more exact, the sons and daughters of Liberal voters who in the first instance broke from the Liberal Party and came over to the Labour Party. Under what the Labour Party is doing now, what the right wing and the Labour Party is doing now, is what the Tories have done in relation to banning people who are not on the electoral register. There are people who have applied to join and they've been banned by this group. What we have is a purge in effect, a preemptive purge, to prevent another purge, which is what they call, which is, as Dave Nellist explained on the radio, on the television this week, is really the old idea of reselection of the Labour Party, of Labour MPs at a certain stage. Even if Jeremy wins, there are many issues that are posed. Number one, leave aside the challenge that could be made for legal action. But if you have a victory, the question is what you do with that victory. And the key question for the whole of the movement is the issue of austerity, and not just denouncing austerity and opposed to austerity, but what those who pretend to be leaders of the movement, what they do in practice to fight against austerity. And above all, what happens in local councils in the next period. And if you look at the number of councillors who are pledged to support Jeremy Corbyn, it's a very small number. Dave will go into that with the facts and figures tomorrow evening itself. And that means you could have the situation where if Jeremy Corbyn is elected and you have people who've appeared on his platform and are introduced by some of the people who've been chairing those meetings, well, this is a Labour councillor who's been forced to carry through cuts. No Labour councillor is forced to carry through cuts. We had an example of that in the Southampton meeting this week, where Nick was along at a meeting and somebody who's carried through big cuts was chairing the Corbyn meeting. We have to press the point from the base here that we go for needs budgets. We do what we did in Liverpool, should form the basis of any campaign that we conduct. You have language being used now in order to ban people in the Labour Party of Operation Ice Pick. And that has connotations for us as Trotskyists. If he wins, they could sabotage him by surrounding them. There's 20 MPs who've declared in favour of Corbyn. How do you overcome this situation? You have to go outside the structures of the Labour Party itself. What we have here is something similar to what happened in France in 1935, when the Socialist Party moved towards the left, under the impact of extra parliamentary events, when the masses turned out onto the street to fight the fascists at that stage. And as a result of the conflict within the Socialist Party, the right wing was vomited out and the Socialist Party moved dramatically towards the left. It will take something of this character in order to really open up a big opportunity to have a really transformative situation in relation to the Labour Party. They might sabotage Corbyn. At the moment he's saying there will not be a split. But the very dynamics in the situation where the right will fight could produce a situation like we had in France in 1935 where they were forced out. It's noticeable now the way they're going after the programme of Corbyn. They're mercilessly attacking his programme. For instance, he was very good the way he raised the question of nationalisation. And then some of the people in his entourage watered it down and said, well, this is not clause 4. We want the nationalisation of the railways. Then the issue was raised in relation to, well, how are you going to pay for it? And unfortunately, people like John MacDonald didn't answer that question very well. They just said, because the issue is linked to the pensions of ordinary people who might have bought some of the stocks in the railway industry itself. We have the position of compensation for small owners, for small people who've got a few shares, on the basis of proven need. It's an old position that we've put forward. Small businesses, he had a programme for small business, and I think it was correct for him to say it would be possible to help small businesses who have their backs to the wall, but on the basis of the nationalisation of the banks, of giving cheap credit to these small businesses and so on. And then there's the anti-union laws, which is proposing threshold for strike action, which a majority of Tory MPs did not achieve in the last election. The government was only elected by 24% of the electorate. Some of the union leaders are trying to avoid the issue of fighting this legislation, not just in Parliament, but through a 24-hour general strike itself. So overall, the situation in Europe, in Britain, is extremely unstable. And this can become worse under the blows of the economic situation that, as I've said, are there in outline at the present time. There's no possibility for this society on a capitalist basis to seriously undermine mass unemployment. Unemployment has grown in Britain in the course of the last couple of months. Draghi, the ECB commissioner, made the following statement. At such a pace that we have at the present time, the European continent may never shake off persistently high unemployment and will be stuck in debt until the distant future itself. They're going into this economic situation, that is the capitalists, with all the problems from the last crisis unresolved. with enormous debt that is being carried over. They don't have the firepower now to do something about the economy. For instance, in relation to rates, the American ruling class would like to increase rates. From the point of view, they think they've got a not bad situation in the US today. If they increase rates, that would be similar to what happened in the US in 1937. I haven't got time to explain this, when they made a blunder and when it threatened to introduce a much worse crisis than you'd seen from 1929 to 1933. We've had low part-time jobs. Even in Germany, it has one of the most precarious labour forces, if you like, throughout Europe at the present time. It's true, if there's a small growth in employment, that can be good because it gives confidence to workers to go into struggle. We saw something like that in America, where there was a small increase of low-paid jobs in the fast food industry, and the working class got resumed confidence and went into the battle. And as we know, that resulted in the 15 Now movement itself. There are big movements in Belgium, in France, so on and so forth. And then there is, of course, the horrors of what we've seen in the last couple of weeks of the so-called immigration problem. And that's a problem of the crimes of imperialism, the crimes of Cameron in relation to Libya, and the crimes of the US in relation to the whole of the Middle East, beginning with the Iraq War. It's an absolute scandal the way the Chilcot inquiry has been delayed, and Blair has had the opportunity to change the report, to alter the report, and so on. There is a mass consensus now in Britain and worldwide that he is a criminal. You look at the position that exists now, 60 million people have been moved from their place of location, from their homes, in the course of the last period itself. There's between 500,000 and 1 million alone who are threatening to cross the Mediterranean. And almost 2,000 people have been killed there. We can't be impervious to this, but it's horrible to see what's happening to the peoples who are being hounded from one corner of the world to another. And we need to come forward and press the labour movement to be sympathetic and to open opportunities for them to live, if you like, because everybody, I mean, most of the population of London are actually from an immigrant basis when you trace it back. And therefore we're all immigrants in that sense. The press try and give an impression that that people are unsympathetic. Look at the way the Greek workers on some of those islands were openly sympathetic, and in Italy as well. On the basis of capitalism, there's no solution to this problem. But on the basis of socialism, it will be possible to transform the situation itself. Europe is now a madhouse. There is no possibility of Europe being united on a capitalist basis. Only the working class, standing for the socialist Europe, will be able to complete this. In every country in Europe, there are mass upheavals now. In Ireland, we've been to the fore in the mass campaigns there, so much so that one of our comrades, Paul Murphy, faces being pulled before the court, fined, possibly imprisoned and so on, because of the campaign that we've conducted on water charges itself. There is the incredible same-sex referendum in Ireland, which was a blow against the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, against all the backwardness that existed there and so on. Look at what happened in the referendum in Scotland itself, and the Corbyn phenomena is an English manifestation of what took place around the referendum in Scotland itself. All of these issues are creating a mood of opposition amongst working people. The horrors of the Middle East are not an accident. You have the prospect on a capitalist basis of a reappearance of a 30-year war like we had in the Middle Ages. I don't believe that will take place if the working class come together, mobilise and act in a unified manner. The developments, for instance, in Beirut and in Lebanon in the last week, where they've turned the working classes come together in a movement against the government, and they did that in Iraq, they did that in Syria at a certain stage, and they will do it again in the future. There's no alternative but for us to create a new mass party. It may not be a rounded out revolutionary party which would be equal in every sense to what we think would be necessary in the situation. But around Corbyn, around that movement is the possibility, either by the right being elbowed aside, or if he loses, or they refuse to recognise his victory, he now then being forced to go in the direction of a new party. When George Galloway was at his height in the anti-war movement, he approached myself and Dave Nellist to go for a discussion with him in the annex to Parliament. We had a very good discussion with him. And he said, you had a meeting in the Albert Hall. We said we had 2 meetings, George. And in Alexander Palace, when there were 4, 5, 6,000, 7,000 in the Alexander Palace at the time when we were at our height in the movement in Britain. He said, yeah, that's a model. He said, what we are intending to do, what I'm considering, he said, is to go to the big anti-war demonstration where there were, let's recall, 2 million people, and say Labour is finished and call for a new party. He didn't do that, and he missed the opportunity. Jeremy Corbyn has a new opportunity now. We have to raise with them the idea of calling a conference of all of those who accept a class struggle, fighting and socialist programme. Don't have to necessarily have the wording of clause 4, but something of that character. Book the Alexander Palace. Have it as an open organisation, much like Syriza was, with the right of tendencies and so on to participate. On that basis, you could have a new phenomenon in Britain with the backing of significant sections of the trade unions. It wouldn't make any difference, by the way, if it was 20 MPs. We are not going to rush into anything. We must keep trust together. We don't know what's going to happen in the Corbyn phenomena. The Trust Conference that's taking place in a couple of weeks' time must be supported energetically. We don't know which way the situation is going to develop. We hope that Jeremy Corbyn will be pushed in a left and radical direction. From what I can see, is open. And he's conducted a brilliant campaign in a certain sense by appearing open. But we have doubts about the core Camarilla, about the advisors around him. People like Livingston, who hasn't got the best of records and struggles in the past. When we were fighting in Liverpool, when we were taking on Thatcher, he broke rank along with David Blunkett and settled with the government and in effect carried through cuts in the GLC and in Blunkett's area in Sheffield as well. So we'll engage in discussion, we'll engage in debate, but we will also insist on clarity of programme, where the people can be socialists in a meeting, they can be in favour of Corbyn in a meeting, but it's what you do on the ground, how you fight for working people, whether you are prepared to go to the end. The Socialist Party is to say what needs to be said and do what needs to be done. On that basis, I think we can create a force that can play a big role. We already have that force. We can create a bigger force, raising my voice against the rain, a much bigger force in the period that we're going into, and create the spine of a future mass movement that will offer a real step forward for the working class of Britain.